All right, boys and girls. Continuing to look at how God's heavenly hosts, his angels, serve him as well as serving God's people. Glad you're feeling better. As well as serving God's people, which is us. Serving God's people would be the same thing as serving God himself. Let's look first this evening at something some of us may not have been aware of regarding angels. We're looking at a heavenly council meeting which takes place in the last chapter of 1 Kings, chapter 22. If you'll turn to chapter 22 of 1 Kings. Ahab, our boy Ahab, was a king over the northern kingdom of Israel. We've studied in here in our Sunday morning class, actually, about Ahab and his experiences with Elijah, or vice versa, when we were studying the life of Elijah and the great scene at Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And we looked at Ahab's wonderful bride, Jezebel, and her gruesome death. Matter of fact, we've mentioned it all throughout history. We've never known a parent to name their daughter Jezebel. Or Rahab, for that matter. And don't tell me y'all got a cousin named Rahab or Jezebel. But we begin tonight not with Jezebel, but with her hubby, Ahab. Ahab hadn't been doing right, and he and his bride have led God's people, the Jews, off into worshiping Baal. And the fact of the matter is, Ahab has pretty much worn out his welcome with God. But Ahab's minding his business one day. And we now have, by the way, in Israel, we now have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, two distinct countries in Israel at this time. But Ahab's minding his business one day when Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, the other king, he comes to visit. 1 Kings 22, somebody read verse 2, please. Yeah, we're going to have a little chat. I want a side note here, a little bit of trivia. Ahab and Jezebel, his bride, they hung out in Samaria. All right? In the southern kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom of Judah is south of the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay? So why does the passage read here that Jehoshaphat came down to visit Ahab when he had obviously traveled from south to north? Very good. Because most of the time, I don't know if you heard Mignon, but most of the time when you have Bible directions, it's normally given by change in elevation. That's not given by north, south, east, and west like we give elevations. Folks like Joe and Vicki that have been to Jerusalem, they realize Jerusalem is up on a plateau, probably 2,500 feet, half a mile high off of the desert floor. So the southern king here, Jehoshaphat, he went from a 2,500 foot elevation down to the desert floor or sea level of Samaria. That's why it says that. Same thing in Acts 8 where Philip, quote, went down to Samaria from Jerusalem. And we're in Luke 10, the Good Samaritan the victim was going down to Jericho from Jerusalem. Whether it's north or south is irrelevant in Bible lingo, it's the elevation. So now if you're ever on Jeopardy, you'll know that one. So anyway, these two kings are chatting now. They're having a little visit. And Ahab has his brainstorm. Let's look at it here, 1 Kings 22 again, read 3 and 4. Yeah, I haven't had a good war here in a few years. I'm all in with you. I don't even know what you're talking about, but yeah, we'll go do that if you want to. Now, this Ramoth Gilead is simply one of the cities of refuge But it happens to lie on the east side of the Jordan, on the right-hand side of the Jordan. It's not inside the country of Canaan itself, but it's still one of the God's territories that he gave them, you know, even though it's part of Israel. But see, the Syrians, which are still in that area, had been occupying this Ramoth Gilead for a while, and Ahab hadn't done anything about it. He doesn't really care, but now he decides if his buddy will go help him get it back. Side note here, do y'all know what a city of refuge was in the Old Testament?
If you were guilty of manslaughter, you could go there and not be killed by the victim's relatives.
Very good. God set this up in Numbers. You see, the Levites, the tribe of Levi did not get any land like Benjamin did and Manasseh did and all them people. Ephraim, the Levites, the priests, this ain't got nothing to do with angels, this is just knowledge. But anyway, the Levites, they didn't get any land, but they got cities. It's either 3 or 4 dozen cities that they got. But they don't need to have a whole lot of land and make a lot of money because they're getting money from the temple tax every year. But anyway, God, back in Numbers, when he was setting up these cities for the Levites, he designated 6 of them, as Roy said, to be cities of refuge. So if you killed somebody accidentally, which today we'd call manslaughter, obviously the family's upset about it. And a lot of them have folks in that family that'll kill you if they catch you. So if you can get to one of these 6 cities of refuge, the law says the family cannot come in there, and the elders will immediately have a trial, have a hearing about your case, and if they find you actually are not guilty, you can live there as long as you want to in that city without fear of any harm from the family where you killed the guy accidentally. That's a city of refuge. That's what this Ramoth Gilead is. So anyway, Ahab asked Jehoshaphat if his army will help him, and Jehoshaphat actually gives a pretty wise answer here. Read verse 5, 1 Kings 22. Well, duh. Might ought to check with God first on this, Ahab. Don't want a bunch of your yes men. I just like to hear one of God's prophets. I don't want to hear one of your yes prophets, but we're going to see that in a minute. All right, verse 8, please, somebody. You got a God prophet around here? Verse 8. Keep going.
The king should not say that, Jehoshaphat replied.
Yeah, Jehoshaphat says, don't say that. So Ahab hates this prophet because he's not a yes man like these other 300 or 400 he's got. He tells him what God tells him versus what he wants to hear. We still have millions of people around here today just like that. So Micaiah, he sticks to God's truth, just like the prophet Elijah did with Ahab a few chapters back. And Ahab's prophets that he's got in his pocket, they tell him what he wants to hear versus what he needs to hear. And God prophesied 1,500 years later after this, God prophesied that 1,500 years later, people are going to be sitting in church pews all over the world and want to hear the same things that Ahab did. Or as they put it in Timothy, material that satisfies itching ears versus sound doctrine, which is the truth. But anyway, so they go get God's man, God's prophet, Micaiah. Read verse 13 and 14, please.
The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, look, as one man, the other prophets are predicting success for the king. Let your word agree with theirs and speak favorably. But Micaiah said, as surely as the Lord...
All right, tell me in Monroe lingo what this servant just told the prophet to do.
Take a bribe.
Suck it up. Said, suck up to this guy.
Play the game, right? Yeah, tell him what he wants to hear.
And everybody else is telling him that.
Well, that's some other 400 prophets he got. They're all telling him what he wants. That's not going to turn out well here in a minute. But the prophet, God's prophet, gives a great response. Verse whatever God says I'm going to say. All right, now read 15 and 16.
When he arrived, the king asked him, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? Attack and be victorious, he answered, for the Lord will give it into the king's hand. The king said to him, how many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?
Notice in 15 there, Micaiah the prophet, he does not preface his remarks with, thus saith the Lord, or this is what the Lord says. He's not serious with his answer, as we'll see here in a minute. He's probably even making fun of the king's yes men prophets. Oh yeah, go ahead, it's fine, you're going to win. So now he tells Ahab the truth. Read 17 and 18.
Then Micaiah answered, I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, these people have no master, let each one go home in peace. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, didn't I tell you that he never prophesies anything good about me, but only bad?
So now we've got a thus saith the Lord coming from the prophet. And he tells Jehoshaphat, his buddy, he said, I told you he wouldn't say anything good about me. Now we're getting to where I wanted to get to about angels on this first part of the lesson, but I had to set it up first. All right, now Micaiah speaks again. Read 19 and 20.
Micaiah continued, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing around him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there? And one suggested this and another that.
What's happening right here? What did Micaiah the prophet see? Christy, this is what we were talking about. Vision to help him answer Ahab's question, but he sees a heavenly council meeting. I told Christy about it before church. If you all have ever worked in corporate America, they're having a status meeting or an update. Your boss calls the big boss. We're all going to have a meeting Friday, a status meeting, update meeting, strategy meeting. And the angels are there. And I brought this up Sunday in our class on spiritual warfare. In Job 1, well, keep your finger on 1 Kings 22. Somebody jump over and read Job 1, verse 6.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them.
And then God asks you, what you been up to, Satan? And then they have a conversation. And I said, I'm not ruling, and this was Sunday, I said, I'm not ruling out the possibility that this wasn't a regularly scheduled meeting. I can't prove it one way or the other. But God's there. Some of God's angels are there. Satan's there, and some of Satan's angels are there. It's like a scheduled status conference or something. You get the context of how we set that up. But anyway, as we brought out Sunday morning, Luther made a great statement years ago. He said, the devil is God's devil. God created him. God's got him on a leash. He's still powerful, and I don't want to get into our Sunday lesson. But that's how powerful the devil and his angels are, but they have to go to God for permission. God's got them all on a leash. It may be a long leash, but God's the one that created them, and he controls them, gives permission or not permission. So now we read here in Kings about this heavenly council meeting, and it opens up our eyes to some of the things that go on in the unseen spiritual world. A couple of things. First, it's clear in verse 20 here that God has decided that Ahab's going to die. And notice that while the Lord is seated, all the angels of the host are standing around him. They're standing before. Number one, in honor of his authority. And it's also shows that they're ready and willing to act to go carry out any orders he may have in the throne room in that meeting. So when the council meeting, for lack of a better term, commences, again, God has already decided that Ahab's going to die at Ramoth. And he asked the angels how Ahab's death should be accomplished. So we can infer from the passage where God says, what does entice mean? Did your translation say, who will entice Ahab? Y'all have entice? Persuade. The actual definition of the Hebrew there is deceive, but it all means the same thing. But anyway, they kicked it around among themselves. And the passage says, it was read a minute ago, quote, that this one said this, and that one said that. These are the angels talking back and forth. This one said this, and that one said that, Micaiah says. So we can assume that the angels are offering suggestions to God on how we ought to get this done with Ahab. All right, carry on, read 21 and 22.
Finally, a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord, and said, I will entice him. By what means? The Lord asked. I'll go out and be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets, he said. You will succeed in enticing him, said the Lord. Go and do it.
I'm going to call this spirit an angel, which angels are spirit. But anyway, he steps up. Notice how even though that God has decided that Ahab is going to die and where he's going to die, he still opens up the how, H-O-W, he still opens up the how for some debate during this meeting. So the angels have some input. Then a spirit volunteers for the job and tells God how he's going to take care of it, and God approves. Had God known that this plan would have failed, he would have vetoed it. This is part of the event that could be a little unsettling to us. A spirit allowed God to deceive a king with lies, but let's not lose sight of the fact that no matter how this comes out, God's purpose remains what it is. That's kill Ahab. And Ahab, before we get really troubled about this, deceiving, Ahab is not an innocent Christian here. God knows his heart. If you do a 5 or 6 week study on Ahab and Jezebel, you'll see that he and she get exactly what they deserve. But anyway, back to God's prophet and King Ahab. Read verse 23, 1 Kings 22.
So now the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you.
Very clear here now that Ahab knows ahead of time from the prophet that his prophets, his yes men, are lying to him. So he doesn't learn this after he gets out to Ramoth, right before he's getting ready to get killed. He knows all this ahead of time, but he makes up his own mind with his own free will to go out there. And this text shows us here very clearly where God has the sovereignty and he decides to kill Ahab, but he still allows the input on the how-to from his angels. And God's not searching for ideas like he couldn't come up with something on his own. He's just allowing his heavenly host to bring up options and become involved in his divine decree, if you will. And there's no hint here that the spirit that volunteered to deceive Ahab's prophet was a pre-programmed robot. He volunteered, quote, the passage says he, quote, came forward and stood, unquote. Nobody drug him up there. On free will. We realized that God was not bound by this idea, but he knew it would succeed, so he went with it. Now, the specifics of the plan that God wanted his angels to come up with were simple. Which one of you angels are going to do it? How are you going to do it? And will it succeed? So Ahab's been told, as I said, by the heavenly representative of God, that God put lies in all your yes men prophets. And I'm telling you, their lies is not going to work out like that. Let's see how it plays out before we move on. Read 24 and 25.
Then Zedekiah's son Kenana said, went up and slapped Micaiah in the face. Which way did the Spirit from the Lord go when he went from me to speak to you? He asked. Micaiah replied, you will find out on the day you go to hide in an inner room.
So this is one of Ahab's yes men. He walks up and slaps God's prophet in the face. And now tell me which spirit made me do that, kind of making fun of him. And Micaiah's answer was, you're going to find out one day when you're in your room trying to hide. And read 27, 28.
The king of Israel then ordered, take Micaiah and send him
So Ahab, like many today, he doesn't like what he hears from God. So he throws Micaiah in prison. By the way, do you like Micaiah's comment here in 28? Ahab just said a, kind of off the cuff thing. Keep him in prison on bread and water till I return in peace. Do you like the prophet's comment? What's he saying? Yeah, right. He said, if you come back in peace, then I've been told something that ain't true from God. So Ahab and Jehoshaphat, his new buddy, they go up against the Syrians at Ramoth Gilead, even though they were told by God's prophet, don't do that. Let's see how it worked out for them before we move on. 34 and 35.
Someone drew his bow at random and hit the king of Israel between the sections of his armor. The king told his chariot driver, wheel around and get me out of the fight. I've been wounded. All day long the battle raged, and the king was propped up in his chariot facing the Aramaians. And the blood from his wound ran onto the floor of the chariot, and that evening he died.
With all that we've studied in here thus far, and this, quote, certain man, this random soldier, unquote, drew his bow at random, unquote, and the arrow hit Ahab among all the thousands of soldiers out there at random in a crease that wide in his armor. At random. Don't think any of this is just coincidence. God's hand is all over this, and I've said for years, there is no coincidence in the life of a Christian. Think about that. You start believing in coincidences, then you're overruling the sovereignty of God, but that's another study. Read 37 and 38. 1 Kings 22.
So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried him there. And they washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria where the prostitutes bathed, and the dogs licked up his blood as the word of the Lord had declared.
No, not yet. When it says it's just like when you see a passage in the New Testament that says, as was said by Moses and the prophets, as was said by the psalmist, as was written of days of old, or some language such as that. If you dig a little bit, 99% of the time, you can go back and find where that passage is in the Old Testament. All right, so you see this right here. You died and the dogs licked up his blood, quote, according to the word of the God, Lord, that was spoken, unquote. This is fulfilling a prophecy that God made through Elijah a few chapters back. Do you remember a boy by the name of Naboth that had a vineyard beside the palace? Naboth. He was just a hand, honest, by himself, little bitty vineyard. But Ahab wanted it. So Jezebel, okay, big boy, you want that vineyard? I'll get it for you, honey. So she trumps up, I'm winging it here, it's been a minute, but Jezebel trumps up charges against this Naboth, and they arrest him with their soldiers, and they take him out and stone him. And Elijah makes the prophecy right there to Ahab, said, the dogs are going to lick up your blood one day, just like they did Naboth for what you did. And that's where it's coming through right here. You can go back 3 or 4 chapters in 1 Kings and find that. So this story shows us that God held a heavenly council meeting. We don't know how often, but oftentimes angels are present at these meetings like they were here. And they're involved in a strategy session with God in charge, obviously. But remember the language that was read earlier when they were sitting all around discussing Ahab's death. And one of them said this and one of them said that. You know, they were just talking, throwing ideas out there. Thought that was interesting. Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel 4. Let's look at one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams for a minute. I'm not going to go back over what I already saw or what it's all about, because that's not relevant to what I'm trying to point out here in this study. But I want to notice who interprets this dream for him. Daniel 4, verse 4, please. Somebody? Daniel 4, verse 4. Mark, you got it?
I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace.
Can you spell Nebuchadnezzar without looking? Quick. Look at me, quick. N-E what? In all my notes, I got N-E-B. But anyway, he's just hanging out. Everything's great. What's it say? I was at ease in my palace, never going to be another poor day. Read verse 5.
I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me.
How quickly life can turn around, as we all know. So Nebuchadnezzar, he begins to explain the dream or the visions, and he's explaining it to Daniel. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I got to hit a couple of these to get to where I need to get. Read 13, 14. He's talking to Daniel.
I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and yet scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it and the birds from its branches.
So the writer identifies this Holy One as a watcher. Translated surprisingly enough in the Hebrew, a watcher. I'm going to call him an angel, but anyway, according to what the text says, the watcher came from where? Very good. And as the watcher as it's used right here, this particular passage, is a watcher, is it singular or plural? Singular. A watcher, correct. One, singular. Hold on. Watcher coming out of heaven, and the watcher speaks to him. Now drop on down and read what the watcher, singular, says to him in 17.
This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the Holy One, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of the men.
The decree there is an official order. So he says the official order of the watchers, plural, is given. Now read verse 20, drop on down and hit 24.
This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king.
So in 17, this sentence or this official order of the watchers, plural, was a decision by the word of the holy ones, plural, which are angels. And then 24, the interpretation is a decree from the Most High. In other words, God still has his watchers, God still has his holy ones involved in decision making, but at the end of the day, the final decision has God's stamp on it. So we see a decision again made by heavenly council. And it's clear that God, the Most High as he's called here, makes the ultimate decision. But all these holy angels here called watchers are again involved in the process of issuing the sentence on Nebuchadnezzar. And I didn't check it, but I think this is, Saul, you might remember it. I think this is where he goes out and eats grass in the pasture for about a year and got the long fingernails and toenails. How long? 7 years. Okay, 7 years. So another heavenly council meeting involved with the punishment of Nebuchadnezzar. All right, turn to the book of Zechariah. I know probably a lot of you read that today in your daily devos. Zechariah, Z-E-C-H. This book has some scenes in it where it's the angel's job or current assignment, if you will, to explain some things to a prophet of God. Not unlike where Gabriel and the watchers in the book of Daniel explained dream. They came, explained dream to Daniel. They claim, explained this vision here to Nebuchadnezzar a minute ago. But let's look at a good one where an angel of God is involved with explaining things to a prophet of God. Zechariah 1, somebody, let's read 7 and 8, please.
On the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month Shebat, in the second year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo the prophet. I saw by night, and behold, a man riding on a red horse. He stood among the myrtle trees in the hollow. And behind him were the horses red, sorrel, and white.
So if you ever need to know who Zechariah's dad or granddad were, right here it is, in case you was wondering. We're going to see here in a minute that the one riding the red horse is special. And the angels riding all these other color of horses are a little different, the one riding the red horse. But we'll look at that in a minute. Zechariah 1, read verse 9, please. The prophet Zechariah asked this question. Go ahead.
Then I said, my Lord, what are these? So the angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are.
So an angel appeared to Zechariah, separate from the one on the red horse. And Zechariah doesn't know what he's looking at. So now it's this angel's current job assignment, his current job description, if you will, to explain to Zechariah what it is he's looking at. All right, read verse 10.
And the man who stood among the myrtle trees answered and said, these are the ones whom the Lord has sent to walk to and fro throughout the earth.
So before the messenger angel can explain what Zechariah is looking at, the one, capital O, the one who had been on the red horse steps in and explains what all these other horses represent. Most of you are aware, I assume, I know but those in our spiritual warfare study we mentioned, that Satan and his evil ones patrol the earth, as it reports to God in Job 1, as we looked at earlier. But here in Zechariah, we should get some comfort out of the fact that we have God's angels also patrolling the earth, as we just read. And we know from other passages that they are patrolling for our benefit as opposed to Satan and the evil ones who are patrolling for our detriment. Let's get a report from these patrolling angels and see how their little patrol turned out. Read verse 11.
So they answered the angel of the Lord, who stood among the myrtle trees, and said, we have walked to and fro throughout the earth, and behold, all the earth is resting quiet.
Very good. Notice the chain of authority here. The patrolling angels answer to, they report to the angel of the Lord on the red horse. And their comment reminds me of a night watchman going up and down the street shaking doors in these small towns. Down in Mangum they do that, and they put a little note in there, Deputy so-and-so came by at 1:10 a.m. or something. That's what they've been doing, going to and fro throughout the earth. So let's realize in this passage that we have angels being assigned two responsibilities here, or jobs. One, go explain my prophet Zechariah what it is he's looking at. And number two, a bunch of y'all other guys, angels, start patrolling the earth. And a note here, just for funsies, the original language here says that these angels on horses were, quote, going to and fro, unquote, throughout the earth. Does that passage sound familiar? Relating to who? Satan. It's not the exact same Hebrew that's in Job, but it's translated the same here in the English. We mentioned a week or two ago, so there's two more job descriptions, job functions of angels that we mentioned. Go explain to my prophet what he's looking at, and number two, get on your horses and patrol to and fro throughout the earth and report back to angel of the Lord. Now, we looked a week or two ago, I think, where God sent his angels to kill 185,000 Assyrians one night to protect God's people. He also sent the angel of the Lord to kill 70,000 of his people, Jews, in Jerusalem because David took a census. We saw that. And we called them God's law and order angels, or God's enforcers, whatever language you want to use. Let's look at a couple of passages where the speakers, the writers, recognize that God's angels can also be warriors for God. This will show us that the heavenly host, as they're often called, are God's army. And he calls his army into service from time to time against his enemies. Joel chapter 3, turn to Joel, Joel chapter 3, please. And the prophet is asking for God to show some mercy on Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. I mean, ease up on them now. I mean, the captivity and all that, Lord, can you just ease up? So Joel chapter 3, read verse 11, please.
Hasten and come, all you surrounding nations, and gather yourselves there. Bring down your warriors, O Lord.
Warriors here is translated mighty ones or powerful ones. So Joel recognizes that God has these mighty warriors at his disposal. Joel recognizes that. And we should as well. Let's not forget our passage from a few studies back. 2 Thessalonians, the first chapter, where it's talking about on sentencing day when Jesus comes back. And I'm winging it here, but verses 7 and 8, he says, Jesus coming back, bringing his fiery angels, seeking vengeance. That's not good. His angels seeking vengeance on, number one, those who know not the Lord, number one, and number two, those who obey not the gospel. So let's look at Isaiah's comments about this. Isaiah 40. Isaiah 40. And since we're in Isaiah 40, I want to run down this rabbit trail a second and visit with you again about some scriptural explanations of the sovereignty of God, which I love to do every chance I get, to explain and talk about the sovereignty of God. And Isaiah 40 is a good place to do it. So before I get to my angel text, look at a couple of these. Read verse 11, Isaiah 40.
He will feed his flock like the shepherd. He will gather the lambs with his arm and carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those who are with him.
Okay, here the author's showing the kinder, gentler side of God. By the way, does anybody, y'all, Gary or Mignon or somebody, y'all know Isaiah 40, verse 29? Anyway, this just came to me. I was at a convention. Where was I at today? Somewhere. Anyway, there's three. Yeah, I was at. No, I know. I'm going to get to that. My point. Anyway, he had 29 on the back of his shirt. 40, 29. I said, young man, you know what that next two verses down says, verse 31? No, sir, I don't really know. I said, he who waits upon the Lord will rise up, will run and not grow weary, and rise up, grow wings, sprout wings like eagles, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't know that when three of the four of them guys in there said, amen. I said, well, you was on your shirt. It wasn't on mine. So anyway, verse 11, we're showing the, what's it say? Be always ready to give a reason for how you believe or something like that, Peter. Something like that. If that's not what it says, it should have said that. All right, verse 11, we're looking at the kinder, gentler side of God. All right, verse 12 in Isaiah 40, please. Verse 12.
He who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, measured heaven with a span, and calculated the dust of the earth in a measure, weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance.
What's the first word in that verse? Who? God seems to be being a little facetious here, talking with Isaiah, a little joking, like, you know anybody else could measure off the earth like I did? All right, read verse 13.
Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has taught him?
What's God saying here in 13 in your language, lingo? Let me read you 13 in another translation to bring it home. Has anyone told the Lord what he must do or given him advice? Period. Or question mark. That's what he said. Now read 14.
With whom did he take counsel, and who instructed him, and taught him in the path of justice, who taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding?
So God says here, who do I get advice from? If I need some advice, where do I go? Who explains stuff to me that I don't understand, God's saying? The unspoken answer is obviously nobody. One more, read verse 25. Isaiah 40.
To whom then will you liken me, or to whom shall I be the Holy One?
I'm the one and I'm the only, God says. All these passages you put together, that's sovereignty. And then again, my go-to passage in Psalm 115 on sovereignty, verse 3. Our God is in the heavens doing what he wants. That's sovereignty. All right, back to our angels. Isaiah 40, read verse 26. Not all at once. Isaiah 40, 26.
I lift up my
Obviously, angels, as we know, are created beings, just like us. But what else does this passage say about God's relationship with his angels? Very good. Well, he's God. We mentioned a few weeks ago before we got to this part of the study that maybe they're all named the same like George Foreman's boys, George 1 through George 5. But the passage here tells us that when God calls them out by name, he said none of them come up missing. I want to throw that in there. God's warriors. All right. Last illustration, Genesis 24. Genesis 24. Somebody read Genesis 24 verses 1, 2, 3, and 4, please.
Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of the house, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from daughters of Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred, and take a wife for my son Isaac.
The voice sounded like it came from heaven up there. Israel, I don't want to get too far out in the pond. Sometimes I get back, sometimes I don't. Israel is like this. This is Israel. Mediterranean Sea over here, okay? And Lebanon and Saudi Arabia and all that. The original where Abraham started was in Ur, U-R, Chaldees, what's way down here, way over here. That's where his brother died, Lot's daddy and all that. And then when they left Ur of Chaldees, they come around about halfway around Saudi Arabia. They've still got to go all the way around here to get to Israel. About halfway across the top is Haran, H-A-R-A-N. That's where he's talking about. That's where he spent a lot of his time after he left Ur. So Abraham's looking for a wife for Isaac. And he absolutely does not want him marrying one of them Canaanite women, one of the neighbor ladies that he goes to school with down there. So he has his servant. So I want you to go back to home country, Haran, and find a wife. So now the servant, he pulls a Moses on Abraham. Read verse 5.
The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which he came?
Yeah, maybe I find one, might be the right one. She might not want to come back. She might not want to move to Louisiana. I don't know. So he's creating a problem before there ever is one. All right, read verse 6.
Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there.
Yeah. I don't want him marrying a Canaanite woman here, and I don't want him going back to Haran marrying somebody. I want you to go to Haran, get the woman, and come back here. All right, now read verse 7.
The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there.
Abraham's doing what we preach a lot, which we need to do in our prayer life and in our mental life. He's remembering all the blessings and guidance that God had given him from years past. You see that? Telling that servant what all God had done for him back in the day. Then number 2, quit making excuses. Just do what I tell you, because I'm going to have one of God's angels leading you. So it's all good. Who does he say of the servant? Whose angel? Lord's angel or God's angel. So again, angels can, when needed, act as guides. Guides. And also we remember the cloud by day and the fire by night and all that stuff guiding the Jews. But I want to bring out one more point about this story before we move on to another angel. The servant gets to the homeland safely, imagine that, with an angel guiding him. And he sets up shop by the main water well in town, which is out there by the Dollar General. I've been there. So read 10, 11, and 12, Genesis 24. He's on his mission now to find a wife.
And the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of
Very good. Couple things here. Abraham's servant starts praying that God will help him, guide him on finding the right woman for his boss's son. But number two, if you'll read the passage closely in verse 12, this is another lesson for us. He doesn't tell God how, H-O-W. He just tells him what he'd like to have done at the end. How you do it's up to you, God. We have a bad habit sometimes. Let me give you an example. It just came to me. We were at a place one time after Katrina, John, and we had a guy at this place that member there, and he'd lived in the Pascagoula, Jackson County area for a long time, so he knew the area, but he was with us at this time. True, I swear it's true. He led the prayer one night, Wednesday night prayer or Sunday night prayer, and it was right after Katrina hit. He started telling God how God needs to run this deal. He said, God, please, you know they got to keep that road open down there between Highway 16 and Highway 90. Please keep that particular road open. Jesus' name, amen. Like God didn't know what he needed to be open. He was giving him specifics of what roads he knew that God needed to keep open. I'll never forget that. But anyway, this guy here, he got it right. He don't tell God how to do it. Just please show me the right one. All right. Read 13 and what did you just read? 13, 14, or 10, 11, 12? Yeah, read 13, 14. That makes sense to go in order, see?
Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the maiden to whom I shall say, pray, let down your jar that I may drink. And who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that thou hast shown steadfast love to my master.
Now he's telling God, asking him specifically, showing him specifically, telling him how, H-O-W, would you please show me? We know from previous study, God doesn't need a lesson in how on anything. But let's see if it turns out okay for the servant here when he gave God a suggestion. Read 15. He's asking for divine guidance, which don't hurt. Read 15.
Before he had done speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar upon her shoulder.
So we now know that the wife of Isaac is going to be Rebekah. And they'll go on and have Jacob and Esau, etc. So the guiding angel that went from Abraham's house to the home country has done his job. He got the servant safely to where he was supposed to do. That was his job assignment. And as usual, we don't hear from the angel anymore. He did what he was supposed to do. He don't sit around and visit for a week. It's mission accomplished. I'm going to report back in. Let me make this next point here before we close. Kind of leaving angel on the back burner for a minute. So the servant has picked Rebekah, or God picked Rebekah. The servant goes with it. They go to Rebekah's house. And of course, we meet brother Laban, who we mentioned a couple weeks ago, that would later make Jacob, Isaac's son, work 7 years for one wife that he didn't want and work another 7 years for the other wife. Anyway, that's what I want to bring us out. Laban is there, the brother, and he asked the servant, how did you come to choose my sister Rebekah? So the servant begins to, I'm making another point here off of angels. So the servant begins to recount what we just read, but there's one twist in this account. Read 43, 44, and 45.
Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I shall say, pray, give me a little water from your jar to drink. And he will say to me, drink, and I will draw for your camel also. Let her be the woman to whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had done speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with the water jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, pray, let me drink.
Exact recount of what happened, but there's one twist to the story, and it's important to me. Do you see it? What's the first sentence of verse 45?
Before I finish speaking in my heart.
What's that mean to you, Mark? You know the answer. Well, he was praying, but be more specific. Before I finish speaking in my heart. What's it mean? Very good, Mignon. He was praying to himself. He was praying silently. So what does this give? Let me throw in, what's her name? Samuel's mama, Hannah Banana. Samuel's mama was praying to herself. The only thing that was moving was her lips. The high priest, what was his name? Eli. He thought she was drunk. She was praying to herself, but her lips were moving. This man here was praying to himself. This gives us the authority to do what in our prayer life? Y'all are out at Cracker Barrel with 10 of your cousins out there, and y'all want to stand around and hold hands, stand up all the way around the table and bless the food, that's fine. Somebody said, would you like to say a blessing? I said, I've already done it to myself. We're good. We're good. You can pray to yourself. So, context, if we had stopped studying back here around verse 15 or so, where Rebecca showed up, we would never have learned this little nugget of information. So, I just threw those last couple in there just for free. Y'all got any questions, comments? Don't understand anything? Understand it all? All right. Ma'am? No, he hears us individually. Most prayers in the Bible are individual. Yes, ma'am. All right.